Howdy folks, welcome back for module 12 of the CompTIA A Plus course. As you can probably see, this module is called Identifying Operating System Types and Features. Now for those of you that's brand new to the channel, that's watching this video for the very first time, just be aware there is other modules in this course. The course consists of 20 modules. So unless you're looking for something specifically in this module, I would advise you to go and check the first module first and then watch them in order. But if you're looking for something specific, you can find that in the video description down below. Everything is marked with nice little timestamps to save you time and effort and inconvenience, of course. Right, so what are the main sections in this specific module, you ask? Well, obviously, one of them is going to be operating system types. That's the first one of two. There's only two sections. The second section is called Compare Windows Editions. It's not a very big module. It's a pretty straightforward module, but still, nonetheless, we've got to go through this to get to the end of the course. Alright folks, you know the drill by now. If you haven't done it already, please remember to hit the like button so that we can help other people out there also discover this video. And if you want to know when I release other content, or module 13 for that matter, then maybe consider subscribing. Alright, on to our first main section, operating system types. In this section, the first topic we're diving into or touching on is Windows and Mac operating systems. So I'm going to start you guys off with Microsoft Windows. The only two we need to actually cover when it comes to Microsoft Windows, well, at least when it comes to the client side, is Windows 10 and Windows 11 editions. Now, we obviously know there's many versions of Windows client. I mean, you get Windows 95, Windows 98. At some point, we had XP, there was Vista or Vista, however you want to pronounce that. Windows 7, there was 8, there was 8.1, there was no Windows 9. We've got 10, and then of course now we've got 11, and now there's also mentioned there might be a Windows 12. Can you freaking believe it? So how many editions is there in each of these? So there's about 5 to 7 in most cases. I think Windows 10 has got about 5 main editions. The two main ones that you guys need to be aware of is Home and Professional. Now, Home is obviously aimed at the people at home, the average Joe that's going to be working from home, that's going to be playing games at home. It gives you everything you could possibly need at home. Now, granted, you are going to get some folks out there, especially gamers and stuff and geeks, that'll probably get the highest edition they can possibly get, even though they will actually never use some of those functions or features. If you look at the Pro function or Pro Edition, I should say, you get functions and features like you have the ability to go and use BitLocker encryption. Now, a home user, what could you possibly be encrypting? I mean, I know there's rare situations where someone at home might legit need to go and encrypt their laptop or desktop, but for the average person, that is not something you would need. That's something that a company would go and use. So you're going to pay all that extra money so that you can go and say, hey, look at me, I've got Pro, but then you get extra benefits like BitLocker, which you're never actually going to go and use. That's just silly in my opinion. So it gives you benefits like BitLocker. It gives you benefits like having the ability to go and join a domain. What domain are you going to be joining at home? There's no domains at home. That's a company thing. It gives you benefits like having access to Hyper-V. That allows you to create virtual machines, something you guys would know about by now. Why would you create virtual machines at home? Now, yes, there are people that needs to do that at home. Someone like me, I need it for my work. But the average person does not need that. So unless you need one of these benefits, one or more, I would suggest just get yourself home. You're going to save yourself a lot of money, folks. Now, 11, that is pretty much the same can of worms, guys. You get home, you get professional. Same benefits, same drawbacks there. Now, when it comes to Microsoft Windows, you also get Windows Server operating systems or Windows Server editions. These also tend to differ somewhat from one another. There's been many versions, and normally when Microsoft releases a client operating system, more or less at the same time, they would release a server operating system. So if you look at like something like Windows XP, back then we had Windows Server 2003. Then Microsoft released Windows Vista or Vista. Then we had Server 2008. Then we had Windows 7 on the client side, and then on the server side we had Windows Server 2008 R2. Then we had Windows 8, and at that point in time we got Server 2012. Then we had Windows 8.1, and at that point we got Server 2012 R2. And then when we got Windows 10, we got Server 2016. And at some point in time, they released Server 2019, but there was no Windows 11 released. Windows 11, they kind of skipped that one, and Windows 11 only came out much later. And now we're sitting on Server 2022, I believe. So they kind of skipped the client edition there, and then just they still released a server edition when they would normally more or less go and release one every 2 or 3 years. But they kind of skipped 11, so we should actually already be on Windows 12 by now, in my opinion. So they kind of skipped one there for a period. All right, and then we've got Apple Mac operating systems. These are only licensed for installation on Apple Mac, and iMac, and MacBook hardware. So yeah, unfortunately, this is not the kind of operating system you can just go and willy-nilly install wherever you want. You need to install it on specific hardware. Apple is very fussy about that kind of stuff, where Windows, you can kind of get away with it. You can kind of install it on different kinds of devices, different platforms here and there. But Apple, guys, not so much. All right, moving on. Unix, Linux, some people call it Linux, and Chrome operating system. Let's start with Unix. Out of the three names we have in the title there, this one came out first. What a lot of folks don't know is Unix is actually a trademark for a whole family of operating systems originally developed at Bell Laboratories in the late 1960s. Unlike the Windows and Mac operating system, Unix is portable to a huge range of different hardware platforms. Versions of Unix can run on everything from personal computers to mainframes and on many types of computer processors. Then we have Linux, which some people pronounce as Linux, so I suppose it depends on where you're from. This one was originally developed by Linus Torvalds. Not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly or if I'm butchering the name. Anyway, it's got a pretty cool story behind it if anyone is curious and wants to go and Google it and read it. Before you ask, no, you don't need to know the story for the exams, folks. That's just something extra. It's just something interesting that you might enjoy reading if you're that kind of person. The guy that developed Linux was staying all alone by himself. I think it was in Europe. I stand to be corrected. I can't remember. This is a very, very, very long time ago that I read this story. But as far as I remember, the guy was in Europe, I think. And as far as I know, he was a very young gentleman staying on his own. And this chap went and developed this operating system, which is an open source operating system. That means it's for free. And eventually, when he finished it, he went and released it on the internet completely for free. Now, as you can imagine, other folks, like the folks at Microsoft, were not happy about this at all at the time, since this was obviously a direct threat to the business. An operating system available for completely free, while Microsoft at the same time are trying to sell theirs. So a lot of folks are not going to go and buy one when they can just get one for free from someone else. So that was the problem that we're facing back then. Anywho, folks, then we also get the operating system called Chrome OS. In other words, Chrome operating system. Chrome OS is derived from Linux via an open source operating system called Chromium. Chrome operating system itself is proprietary. Chrome operating system is developed by Google to run on specific laptop and specific PC hardware, something a lot of people don't realize. Kind of sounds like Apple, doesn't it? With laptops, this is things like Chromebook, and with PCs, it would be things like Chromebox. The Chrome operating system was primarily developed to use web applications, and in a web application, the software is hosted on a server on the internet. So in other words, this is software as a service, if you guys know what that is. And the client connects to it using a browser. Since everything is for the most part technically happening somewhere else on someone else's property, once again, this is cloud, the client computer that the user is using or that you would be using does not have to be a very beefed up machine. It can be a thin client. It can be the cheapest PC that money can buy because everything is happening somewhere else. The user is literally just opening a browser and they need an internet connection with a screen and that's it. Other than that, the machine can be the cheapest PC that money can buy because everything is going to be happening somewhere else. Alright, moving on to some other operating systems, iOS and Android. So with these two I just mentioned, a cell phone or tablet operating system is one that is designed to work solely with a touchscreen interface. So it's optimized for touchscreen interfaces, is something we can say. The main operating systems in this category would be things like Apple's iOS and iPad operating system. These are unfortunately only licensed for installation on Apple's iPhone and Apple's iPads. Oh, and of course, we get Android, which is part of Google. This is Google's stock operating system. Now, Android is something you'll find on a lot of phones, but you'll find over the years it keeps updating itself, and it's basically got subcategories, if you want to call it that, one of which was called Lollipop once upon a time. So from time to time, Google will go and update these operating systems. They'll still be called Android. It's kind of like saying, hey, I've got Windows. Okay, which version or edition of Windows do you have? And that's where I would tell you, okay, I've got Windows 10 or I've got Windows 11. Now, Android is the same can of worms, folks. So if you tell me you've got Android, okay, cool. That's like saying I've got Windows. But which Windows do you have? Which Android do you have? I've got Lollipop, or I've got this one, or I've got that one. You actually get different kinds of Android operating systems, something people don't realize. All right, that's enough about operating system types. Next up, we have the Windows file system types. There are three types of Windows file systems I'm going to discuss with you, but just know there are actually more when it comes to Windows. The three I'm going to list for you are, however, the only ones covered in A+, and they are also the only ones you need to know for the exams. So if there's a file system from Windows that's not listed here, don't worry about it. It's not covered in the course because it's not in the exam. Okay, so starting with the first one of the three, that would be FAT32, folks. The FAT file system is a very early type named for its method of organization, the file allocation table. In other words, that's also the name, mind you. This is a legacy file system, and if you don't know what that word means, the word legacy means it is very old and most likely no longer supported. That's normally what it means with most things. So if some hardware or some software or an operating system is called legacy, it's normally because it's no longer supported, it's been retired or discontinued. Now, FAT32 for the most part is kind of still in use here and there, but it's very rare. You're not going to find it on computers. On the odd occasion, you might, for example, find it on memory sticks. That's the only place I really still find this. So we can look at something like a flash drive or a memory stick. That's the only place you might find FAT32. That's about a 50-50. So I would say about half of memory sticks will be FAT32. The other half would be NTFS. And if it's the one or the other, you can just format it to the one or the other. Now, why are some memory sticks still FAT32? It's because there are still certain types of hardware out there that only recognizes FAT32 flash drives. This will be like some of these new modern printers and scanners. You'll find that with a lot of these printers and scanners, if you go to them, they've got a USB port in them where you can go and stick a USB stick into. And that allows you to essentially print from that flash drive or scan to that flash drive. Now, if that flash drive is not FAT32, one or two things is going to happen. Either that printer will give you an error on the screen, which is what I see half the time. The other half of the time, just nothing's going to happen. It's as if you just didn't put anything into that port. Nothing is going to happen. Another place you might actually find these memory sticks being used quite commonly, the FAT32 ones, is in your car. If you're the type of person that likes to put MP3 songs onto a stick, I know I'm one of them, and you like to listen to them in your car while driving, well, guess what? Your car will only recognize that flash drive in most cases if it's FAT32. If you make that flash drive NTFS, which is the other file system, the most common one, you'll find your car's either not going to recognize the flash drive and it's going to give you an error, or just nothing's going to happen. It's as if you didn't put anything in. So that's two of the most common situations you'll find where you might need a flash drive to be FAT32. Now, since FAT32 is one of the oldest file systems around, you can probably understand that it's also going to have its fair share of drawbacks. For example, if something like a hard drive is formatted as FAT32, this applies to flash drives as well, you'll notice a single file on that hard drive or on that flash drive can never exceed 4 gigs in size. So if this is, for example, a 500 gig hard drive that's completely empty, it's blank, and you try to copy a single file onto it, which is bigger than 4 gigs, you're going to get an error. It's going to tell you not enough space. As you can imagine, that causes a lot of confusion, especially for people that's not in IT. I mean, if you're not in IT and here you are trying to copy a file, it's let's say 5 gigs in size, you know for a fact this drive has got more than 5 gigs of space, and now it tells you not enough space. You can imagine that's going to cause a lot of confusion. You might even go and double check the hard drive space available, only to find that it's got more than 4 gigs. And this just causes more and more and more confusion at the end of the day. So it's not the actual space. The error message is actually incorrectly phrased, in my opinion. It's more the file system doesn't support a file bigger than 4 gigs. So if that hard drive is 500 gigs and it's formatted FAT32, you can store up to 500 gigs on it, as long as you do not store a file bigger than 4 gigs. It's not going to give you any issues. So provided you don't copy a file bigger than 4 gigs, you're not going to run into any issues. So you can go and fill up that whole freaking hard drives of movies, and the average movie is probably going to be about approximately 700 megabytes in size, maybe 1 gig. And as soon as you try and copy one massive HD movie, like the new Avengers movie or something, onto that drive, and maybe it's like a 5 gig or an 8 gig file, nope, it's going to give you an error. It's going to say not enough space. Now, the space error issue is sadly not the only drawback with the FAT32 file system. It's probably the biggest one, but it's not the only one. It also doesn't have any of the security or reliability features that comes with some of the other file systems, like the NTFS file system, which is still coming up. Now, the second file system I have here for you folks on my list today is exFAT, which is short for Extensible File Allocation Table. The exFAT file system is basically an updated version of the previous FAT32 we just spoke of a moment ago. exFAT is a 64-bit version of FAT designed for use with removable drives and flash drives. Interestingly enough, the exFAT file system supports large hard drives like the NTFS file system, so that's pretty cool. Something the FAT32 system does not support. FAT32 systems does not support very large hard drives. They say some manuals will tell you it's 40 gigs, some will say it's 80, some will say it's 100, 120. I myself have formatted hard drives up to 500 gigs in the size of FAT32. There was a very good reason behind that before you guys go ahead and asking me, why I did that. So I can tell you it does work on hard drives up to 500 gigs in size, but what the maximum limit is officially, I don't know. You guys are going to have to tell me. So if anyone has ever tried a hard drive or tried formatting a hard drive bigger than 500 gigs with FAT32, and if it worked, please let me know in the comment section down below if it worked for you and how big that hard drive was. This is just out of curiosity for myself and, well, for anyone watching this module. But there's no reason for you to go and format a hard drive that big with FAT32. Now, FAT, or exFAT should I say, that does support very large hard drives, just like NTFS. So that's pretty cool. exFAT also supports access permissions, so normal permissions like you would get with NTFS. NTFS permissions, basically. It's very much the same thing. exFAT, unfortunately, does not provide encryption. Encryption is something you'll only get with the NTFS file system, which is up next. The NTFS stands for New Technology File System. It's a proprietary file system developed by Microsoft for use with Windows. This file system is the most commonly used file system currently today, and it comes with many benefits like you would expect. The benefits include, but are not limited to, things like file size restrictions earlier. There's none of that. You don't have to worry about that. NTFS also has NTFS permissions, something a lot of you guys may have heard of. So you can go and control who or what has got access to which files and which folders. I love that. And you can also go and put passwords on folders and encryption on folders if you feel like you want to go and do that. All right, let's move on to the next topic in this section, which is the last topic in this section. Operating system compatibility issues. There's a bit of a picture for you guys of what that would more or less look like, but you do get different kinds of operating system compatibility issues. So yeah, I suppose that picture is probably a bit misleading. You get hardware compatibility issues, you get software compatibility issues. So there's going to be times when you or the user want to install something. This could be an operating system, this can be a software or a game, and you're unable to install it or run it due to hardware compatibility issues. I think a game is probably a very good example of that because I have that all the time. I've got multiple computers in my house. Some of them are gaming computers, and there's quite a few cases where only some of these gaming computers can run certain games, especially if you go look at some of these new high-spec games these days. It's very annoying. So sometimes you just don't have enough RAM, or your CPU is not fast enough. But the biggest issue is normally the freaking graphics card. Your graphics card does not support this game, or the graphics card is too slow to run it properly this game. I think a lot of you guys can probably relate to that. Now, when it comes to operating systems, it's the same can of worms, and I think Windows 11 is probably a very good example of that. The majority of operating systems from Windows Vista onwards up until Windows 10 have more or less the same spec requirements. They run on more or less the same CPU spec. They require more or less the same amount of RAM, more or less the same amount of space on your hard drive. So if you can run one, you can for the most part run the other. So up until recently, this has not really been a problem for the last 10 years or so. But now with Windows 11, there's a bit of a twist, if you will. Windows 11, yeah, it runs mostly on the same hardware, but it's got a few extra little tick boxes that needs to be ticked here. And that is things like having a TPM chip on the motherboard. It's non-negotiable. So up until now, it was kind of like an optional option if you want to go and use BitLocker to its full potential. But with Windows 11, it is non-negotiable. You need a TPM chip. It needs to be a 2.0 version, otherwise it's not going to work. So that would be an example of hardware compatibility. If you don't have the right hardware, it ain't going to work. Now, when it comes to software compatibility, there is cases where your game or your program doesn't want to run on your computer because you don't have the right operating system on the computer. That will probably be a very good example. At least I hope so. Fingers crossed. So I think this used to be a huge thorn on my side, up until about Windows 8.1, Windows 10, I would say. Because at that point in time, Microsoft had this feeling to go and release a new operating system pretty much every year. Every year, or at least every second year, there was a new operating system, and then there's another one, and then another one. So just as you get an operating system onto your computer, and you get all your games working, and all your programs working, and all that, then Microsoft decides, okay guys, let's release a new operating system. Now that opens a whole new can of worms now, because all your old games and programs will not necessarily work on this new operating system. Some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them will give you errors because of compatibility. They just don't know what Windows 11 is. So if I've got something running on Windows 10 and I try to install it on Windows 11, the game or the program will be like, what the heck is this? I don't know what Windows 11 is, because when that program or game was released, Windows 11 did not exist. And the same went for the previous operating systems. If you try to install a game or a program on a newer operating system, it wasn't always an older one, it was especially if you try to do this on a newer one, the game or the program in question would not necessarily know what the heck you're doing because it doesn't recognize this operating system. It did not exist when that game or program was released. So there's a couple of solutions to this. I mean, you can go and, for example, make a virtual machine of the old operating system. But that's a lot of work, guys, to go and do that. It's a bit extreme. Another way to go about this is to go onto your desktop of this machine where you're having this issue, right click on that old game or program. This is now after you've installed it on the new operating system, of course. You right click on that icon and you're going to go and run it in compatibility mode 4. If you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, I'm going to switch over to a virtual machine I've got running in the background. It's got Windows 10 on it. Now, whether it's Windows 10 or 11, it's the same can of worms. You can go do the same way. So, switching over now.
A few moments later.
Right, folks, here we are on that Windows 10 machine running in the background. I did this, I think, in one or two of the previous modules as well. Not a lot of demos in this course, but not a lot of demos in this module, but, that's all about, what the module is about. And this module just doesn't have topics that really requires a demo. So I'm going to pretend that this program here, that you can see that's Google Chrome browser, but this can be a program, it can be a game, and for argument's sake, we can pretend that this program or game that I just installed does not work on the operating system I'm running right now, which is Windows 10. It only works on the previous version, which is maybe Windows 8.1, Windows 8, or Windows 7. And if that is the case, one of the solutions to that problem would be to right-click on the program or the game in question, and you go to the bottom here where it says properties. You go click there, and then it opens this window. Let me just go there. All right, so here on the right, you'll see there's a tab that says compatibility. You click on that, And then you'll see here's a section that says run this program in compatibility mode 4. You click on that block, click on the drop down list. On some computers, you're going to find there's a lot of options. Some computers have a lot, some only have a few. My real computers go back way further and they've got way more options. I think it's because I'm running this on a virtual machine today, so it's not giving me all the options I want. But you still get the idea. So if this program or game in question, if you know for a fact it worked on Windows 7, for example, you can click on that. You click on apply, you click on OK, and the next time you run that program or that game, even though I'm running it technically on Windows 10 right now, it's going to run it as if it is Windows 7. And you're going to find that's going to solve a lot of your problems. Now, Microsoft will probably tell you this is going to solve all your problems, which is not the case, guys. I can tell you now from experience, this only works about 50% of the time. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it'll not work. So in theory, it's supposed to always work, but from experience, I can tell you, it won't. You might get lucky, you might not get lucky. End of the day, you've got nothing to lose here and you've got something to gain. If this doesn't work for you, then you're probably going to have to go look at a couple of other methods. But this is the most common way and the easiest and the quickest way to solve that problem. So if you or one of your customers or users are facing this problem, I would suggest you try this method. All right, let's go back to that list of mine. Okay, so I think you guys more or less have an idea what hardware compatibility is and what software compatibility is. So the only thing that's left for me to say here is user training. It's probably one of the most important things here is to educate your users. They need to understand what hardware compatibility is and software compatibility. And yes, it even applies to people that's not in IT. So the next time they complain that my game doesn't want to work, you should be able to tell them that, hey, brah, it is because you don't have a graphics card, or because your graphics card is not powerful enough, or because you don't have enough RAM. That's why that game of yours is not working. Or if they're trying to install a program or a game and it says some sort of error, because of you're running Windows 11, they should understand what it is. It's because they're running an operating system that's too old, or they're running an operating system that's too new for this program or game in question. So educating your users is always probably one of the most important things. Right, folks, we have finally reached the end of section 1, the first section in this module. It only has 2 sections, so if you're only jumping in at this point in time in the video, this video consists of 2 sections, and we just finished the first one. The second one is comparing Windows editions. Now, we did briefly talk about Windows operating systems earlier. We talked about Windows client operating systems. I mentioned a few to you guys, especially Windows 10 and 11. And we did talk about Windows Server operating systems, and I mentioned quite a few additions there for you guys as well. So one of the first things we're going to talk about in this section is the Windows versions we get. What do I mean by that? I mean 32-bit versus 64-bit. So if you don't know what that is the architecture of your computer. So up until about roughly 2008, maybe up until about 2012, pretty much everyone and his uncle will be running Windows 32-bit operating systems. And in that era, between 2008 and 2012, was more or less when people started switching over to 64-bit. Some folks had 32-bit, some had 64-bit, some had both. I was one of the guys that had both of them because sometimes some programs and games only ran on the one, sometimes they only ran on the other one, which is why I prefer to have 2 operating systems. And depending on which one it would run on, I would just start that particular operating system on that particular day. So, and then after about 2012, 2013 is when people kind of completely start switching over to 64-bit, which is a heck of a lot better, gives you more speed, gives you more performance, gives you a heck of a lot of benefits. So if you look at something like 32-bit operating systems, it's got restrictions. You can think of this as the FAT32 file system we spoke of earlier, and you'd remember one of those restrictions on that file system was a single file cannot be bigger than about 4 gigs. Now, 32-bit architecture is kind of the same deal. It also has weird restrictions. So if a machine has a lot of RAM, you or that user would only be able to tap into about 3.3 gigs of that RAM. So if you physically go and install 8 gigs of RAM on a machine, and you're running a 32-bit operating system, if you go check your system properties, you're going to see in brackets, it tells you only 3.3 gigs of the 8 gigs is actually usable. Now, some manuals will tell you it's only 3 gigs that you can access. Some will tell you it's 4 gigs. I'm telling you guys now, go check it. It's actually 3 gigs. Sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but it's usually about 3 gigs. Now, in the exam, is this a question? Yes. They will ask you about this. I don't know if everybody's going to get that question, because in reality, the possible pool of questions is probably a couple of hundred, between 500 and 1,000 possible questions they can ask you, and you're going to get about 100 randomly out of that pool of questions. So there's two exams, and in both of these two exams, they can possibly ask you about this. So should you be one of the unfortunate souls that gets this question, if they ask you what is the maximum amount of RAM a user can have on a 32-bit operating system, the answers I've seen in the exam is normally not 3.3 gigs, which is actually technically the right answer. The answers you're going to get is like 1 gig, 2 gigs, 3 gigs, 4 gigs, 5 gigs. So if you see 3 gigs or 4 gigs in the exam, that's going to be your answer. I think it's usually the 4 gigs one they're going to give you. So they're not going to give you both 3 gigs and 4 gigs because they're so close to one another. You're not going to know which one to go and click on, since they're both technically incorrect. So they're only going to give you 3 gigs or 4 gigs. So whichever one of those two you see in the exam, that's the one I want you guys to go and click on. Unless CompTIA decides to go and add 3.3 gigs in the exam, then I want you guys to go and click on that one instead. But I doubt they're going to go and do that, because that's getting way too much in depth. They're going to just kind of round it off to like 3 gigs or 4 gigs. They keep it simple. So yeah, 64-bit and 32-bit, in case you guys don't know, it can be written in more than one way. So if we talk about a 32-bit operating system, which is the older ones, it can also be written as this, x86. So a 32-bit operating system, both of those is a 32-bit operating system. So you can either go and physically write it out as 32-bit, or you can go and write it as x86. Both of that is a 32-bit operating system. And when it comes to 64-bit, this is the easier one out of the lot. So it's either 64-bit, or you can go write it as x64. That one is very easy to remember because it also says 64 at the back. So, yeah, people get confused by that, especially with the 32-bit one, which is written as an x86. People, if you get any question about that, now you don't know what kind of operating system it is. Meanwhile, they just mean it's a 32-bit operating system. It's all of what it means, people. All right, moving on to Windows Home Edition. So I'm going to be covering specific editions, not all editions, and that's simply because, well, that's what the course covers. I'm trying to cover strictly what CompTIA covers here, and sometimes I'll throw in a bit of extra stuff for you guys, but you'll never have a lack of information. You're rather going to have too much information. Let me put it that way. So when it comes to the Home Edition, this is obviously one of the cheaper ones, probably one of the cheapest ones when it comes to Windows. And this is the one that most people don't want to buy. Most people have this compulsive need to have the latest of the latest and the best of the best, even if they don't need it. So when it comes to having the different editions of Windows, most people probably try and get the most expensive one because of egos. They want to show off, hey, look at me, I've got Enterprise, or hey, look at me, I've got Professional. And as we said earlier in section 1, you don't need that because it's going to give you benefits that the average Joe at home won't need. So Home Edition is perfect for, home use, office use, playing games, and all that kind of stuff. So it's for managing for home use. It's shared use by family members. So people can go and use this machine to play games. They can take turns. They can go make multiple accounts of their own, have their own private documents and private photos and videos and stuff if need be. Not that anyone actually does that anymore, because these days everybody has their own computer. Everybody's got their own phone and tablet. And this Home Edition can obviously also be used for gaming and home entertainment. So you can go and hook it up to your computer screen, to your TV screen. You can go play movies on it if need be. You can just go and play games on this laptop or desktop. There's a lot of things you can go and do. Heck, you can even go watch Netflix on this laptop or desktop if need be. So Home Edition is perfect for that. But if you want to go and use it for office use, especially if you go look at a medium to large size company, then you might need to go look at Professional Enterprise. But if it's at home for your own personal office use, you know what? You can just go get yourself Home Edition, guys. All right, and let's take a look at work and education features. So if you would like to go and use Windows for work, as in a medium to large size company, or if you've got a small company but you've got weird requirements and needs, like you need to be able to join a domain, or you need to be able to encrypt your documents using BitLocker, or you need to be able to create virtual machines, that kinds of stuff which we mentioned earlier in this module. If you need to do that, then you might need to consider getting yourself a more expensive edition of Windows. These will be editions like Pro, Enterprise, or even Education editions. Now, for the most part, you guys are probably just going to be using Pro or Enterprise. The only time we really tend to use Education editions is if you're at a college, university, a school, those kinds of institutions. That's where you would go and use the education ones because they give you unique benefits and features, which is more applicable to those environments. They've got those environments in mind. If you're going to go and use an education edition for normal office environment, yeah, I suppose you're going to get a couple of functions you can go and make use of, but there's also going to be quite a few things missing that you do need. So coming at this from a company perspective, I would suggest rather getting yourself a Pro or Enterprise edition. And if you happen to be working at a college, a university, or a school or something, yes, then you can go look at the education editions and go look at those unique benefits and features. So what are these unique benefits and features? Well, this is things like domain access versus workgroup. If you're going to be working at home or you're going to be playing games and stuff, then you know what? You can go get yourself the home edition we spoke of earlier because you're going to be only on a work group. But if you're going to be working for a medium to large size company, then you're most likely going to have to go and join what is known as a domain, the company domain. To be able to do that, you need to have Enterprise or Professional Edition of Windows. Only those editions allow you to join a machine to a domain. At least when we talk about an on-premises domain. We're not talking about cloud domains. Those ones have got completely different criteria, and it's absolutely not a topic in this course today. Alright, and then some other additional features and benefits you guys will get, depending on how expensive you go of these editions, is of course things like group policies. I mean, show me a medium to large size company these days that does not make use of group policies. I'm sure they're out there, but you're going to have a very hard time finding them. So group policies is something that comes with an Active Directory environment on premises, and to be able to get these benefits, you need to join that machine to a domain. If you don't join it to domain, you're only going to be able to configure local group policies, and nobody ever uses those, to be honest with you guys. So companies normally like to enforce group policies over a network, over the domain. It allows you to configure large groups of devices or large groups of users in one go. So if I've got 100 or 1,000 users that needs a certain setting on their computer, do you want to walk to each and every one of those users and go and configure it in the machines? I mean, sure, it's possible, but that's just nuts. Nobody's going to go and do that. That's just no. So instead, why not do it once on a server in something called the group policies, and then you go and just force that down to all the devices. That's what group policies is all about, guys, and that's why we do that on servers. But to be able to get that benefit, you need to have these devices joined to your company domain, and for them to be able to do that, they need to have the Enterprise or Professional Edition of Windows installed. Now, for those of you that want to know more about group policies, I do have videos about that on the channel. So if you want to know more about that, just ask me in the comment section down below, and I'll tell you exactly which playlist and which video you can go and look at to learn more about group policies. But in a nutshell, there's over 3,000 configurations you can go and do in group policies. It's not just to go and block things. Some people are under the impression group policies are used to go and block users from doing things. Yes, I suppose in a matter of speaking, that's one of the things you can go and do. But group policy can also be used to allow things. So it's used to block things, allow things, turn things on, turn things off, configure things, tweak things. There's going to be cases where it might be something as simple as the wallpaper of a company that I want to go and change. I want to change the wallpaper of every person's machine to the company logo. Now, do you really want to go and walk to every machine and go and change that manually yourself? No! So I'm just going to go to the server. I'm going to go put a group policy, and I'm going to go and upload the picture there, or the logo. And I'm going to force that down to all the users. And as soon as they turn the machines on and off or restart, they're going to see the new wallpaper. Easy peasy, right? Other additional features you'll get by using Enterprise or Professional is, of course, BitLocker. That's going to allow you to encrypt whole freaking drives, flash drives, external drives. So it's full-blown encryption, but if you're at home, you're probably not going to need that because what are you going to be encrypting? And then lastly, guys, you get cool benefits like remote desktop. Very, very cool and useful benefit, but not really at home. This is something you'd want to go and use at the office to connect from one machine to another. And it's most likely going to be from a client machine to a server in most cases. That's usually how it works. All right, folks, on to the last topic in the last section for this module. That is Windows upgrade paths. So if you're running one version of Windows and you would like to upgrade to a newer and better version of Windows, what are the ways we can go about doing that? So the first one would be to go and do an in-place upgrade, and the second one would be to go and do an upgrade itself. So what is an in-place upgrade? That is when you stay on the same machine or the same device, you or the user. So you're not actually switching laptops or desktops or server here. You're staying on the same machine. You're simply and only upgrading the operating system. So you or the user are running, for example, Windows 10, and you decided you want Windows 11, and now you're going to go and upgrade that machine from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Everything else, hardware-wise especially, stays exactly the same. That is an in-place upgrade. Now, if I were to just go and say, hey, let's do a normal upgrade, that could technically mean more than one thing. It could mean that I'm going to stay on the same machine. It could also mean that maybe I'm going to get myself a new machine and I'm just going to go and install the newer version of Windows on there. But that's not exactly what this topic is about. This topic is about specifically staying on the same machine and upgrading yourself to a newer operating system. Now let's imagine that you want to upgrade from Windows 10 to 11, like I said earlier. It's not always as straightforward as you might think. So if I already have Windows installed, let's say Windows 10, and I want to go into a newer version of Windows 11, there's a few things you need to go and look at first. First of all, you need to go and look at the architecture you're currently running. If you're currently running a 32-bit version of Windows, 32-bit version of Windows 10, you can only upgrade to a 32-bit version of Windows 11. You cannot go vice versa. So you cannot go and upgrade from 32-bit Windows 10 to a 64-bit 11, and you cannot upgrade from 64-bit Windows 10 to a 32-bit Windows 10 or 32-bit Windows 11. So you cannot go vice versa. You have to stay in your lane, in other words. So if you've got Windows 10 32-bit, you can only go to Windows 11 32-bit. If you've got Windows 10 64-bit, you can only upgrade to Windows 11 64-bit. So you have to stay in your lane. You have to stay on the same architecture. You cannot go vice versa. The only way you can go and do that is to do a clean installation, which is known as a wipe and load. So if you're currently running Windows 10 32-bit and you'd very much like to run Windows 11 64-bit, you cannot do what is known as an in-place upgrade. You will need to do what is known as a wipe and load. So that requires you or the technician to go and back up everything on that machine, if there is anything that needs to be backed up. Usually there is. Once you've backed everything up, then you go and format the hard drive, you wipe it. And then you go and install Windows 11 64-bit clean from scratch. Once you've done that, then you need to go and restore the backup. So this is actually a heck of a lot more work, guys. But sometimes you've got no choice because some people really are still running 32-bit and they really do need to or sometimes want to go to 64-bit. Then the only way you can go and do that is to go and wipe and load that person's machine. So if you want to go from 32-bit to 64-bit or vice versa, it requires a wipe and load. You cannot do an in-place upgrade. So now we know you need to stay in the same architecture path unless you are willing to go and do a wipe and load. Something else to keep in mind is you need to stay in the same lane as well when it comes to the editions. So if you are running Windows 10 Enterprise, you are preferably going to want to go and upgrade to Windows 11 Enterprise. You cannot go from Windows 10 Enterprise to Windows 11 Home or vice versa. No, you need to stay on the same edition preferably as well, guys. And this is because the functions and features is going to be a mismatch. So if you've got Enterprise of the one edition, you're going to want to upgrade to Enterprise of the other one. Same of Home, same of Professional, all those ones. So architecture-wise, stay in your lane. Edition-wise, stay in your lane unless, once again, you're willing to go and wipe and load. If you're willing to wipe and load, then you also don't need to stay in your lane when it comes to the editions. Then you can just go and do whatever you want. Alright, folks. Finally, we've reached the end of another module in this course. The end of module 12. I hope you guys have learned something. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you have, do me a favor, give the video a like. As I've said in the beginning of this module, the more likes this video gets, the more YouTube pushes it out to more people out there that actually needs it, so that we can help more people out there, which is awesome. If you'd like to know when I upload more nonsense, remember to subscribe. Otherwise, YouTube might not let you know. Sometimes they will, sometimes they might not. And before you guys disappear on me, just a special shout out and thank you to all of you that is sponsoring the channel like usual. I love you guys. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to the Patreon guys. Thank you to the PayPal sponsors. For those of you that is buying me a coffee and milkshake, just FYI, in case you guys don't know, those funds actually go straight to my PayPal. And then I'll just throw you guys as a PayPal donation as well on the screen. So if you buy me a coffee or a milkshake, I'll also throw you up on the screen as a PayPal donation because it just goes straight to PayPal anyway. So whether you go do a direct one or you buy a coffee and milkshake, potato, it's the same thing. Or you can just go and click on the thanks button below the video, or you can just go and become a Patreon. So to all of you that has been sponsoring the channel in one way or another, I appreciate you. If you'd like to do the same, you can find all that information in the video description down below. Alright folks, see you in module 13 of the CompTIA A Plus course.